and we are live on Facebook. Good evening, everyone here in Doha watching. It's me, Hamad and Amari, and welcome to another episode of Swalif. Today, I am talking about media. What it is, why it's causing everyone a pain, what is really news, what is not. There's a million questions I've been asked about this episode, and this is a topic that is not only is it close to me in my life, but I guess everyone who is a millennial, because you were born in this whole world of media. And I'm speaking with Associate Professor Stephanie Edgerly. Hello, Stephanie.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Hello from Chicago.
One of my favorite cities, the Shah. And I've been there once, and I extended my stay, and now all I can think about is when I'm going to be in Chicago next. But that's not what we're here to talk about, Stephanie. You're an associate professor with a specialization in audience insight. Now that is a huge topic. And in order to ask, what makes you the person to be talking about media and consumption, and before we get into audiences and consumption of media, and you are the person who knows the media, right? Is that correct? Is it fair to assume such things? Is it a fair statement? Are you an expert in this field?
Yeah, I am. By training, I got my PhD from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, from their mass communication department, which is in the School of Journalism there. So I guess you can say I've spent more than a decade plus studying the media, specifically with an audience focus on how people use the media, make sense of the media, and the effects that media has on them.
Okay, if I was to say, I was having an interesting conversation with my youngest brother today, and I asked him about media because he wants to go into a career in media, and he's thinking about his next step in his future, which is finishing high school, going to university, and he feels that media is the field that he wants to go into. And when I asked him why media and what is media, or define media, news did not make an appearance. And when I was 17, media only meant, when you heard that word, it meant news, and mostly radio, TV, newspapers. That was your conventional media. So why do you think news is not making it into that age group? He's 17 years old. So why is media now not associated with news?
Yeah, I think that's a common reply that I get a lot, especially when I interview a lot of young people, is that news has sort of a detached, special, oftentimes negative reaction from people. Like, oh, that's newspapers. And when they say newspapers, they mean print newspapers. That's for older people. That's not me. I'm interested in video games, movies, music, right? Creating, and that is associated with media. So, I mean, my approach in a school of journalism, very much, grounded in news and journalism, I tell my students right off the bat, I conceptualize a big tent of media, right? And news falls in that tent, and the industry and the profession of journalism is in that tent, but I don't silo it out, right? It's all kind of related. The challenges, the technology, the revenue models that the movie industry, the television industry, the music industry are facing, I think are very similar to some of the challenges that the news industry is facing. So I just think it does a disservice to think that news is completely different. And I think by approaching that, sometimes we alienate people like your brother who completely divorce, news, and they kind of put it over there from like the fun stuff that they're consuming and interacting with in their daily life.
So I suppose even for me, when I was 17, I wasn't regularly turning on BBC News or CNN or Al Jazeera, or, I was also watching films. I was listening to music. I had my cassette player, my Walkman with my little orange headset. Those little the wire headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. See, and then you had the radio, and it was more entertainment. So I understand the entertainment element of the young people saying, like, looking more at it from an entertainment thing. Now that I'm 32 and I'm watching this, I look at news and try and compare it to what it was before. News is now becoming, or trying to adopt, this entertainment to reach the masses and penetrate these users, whether it's on Facebook, which we're, going to be talking bad about, but thank you for letting us host. But it seems like we went from a place of your news was your source of information, and now your news is your source of criticism, is the source of the thing that you want to stay away from, and as you said, has negative connotations sometimes. But in your tent of media, is news not a pillar? Isn't it a pillar of media?
Yeah, it's a type of media, and so we can kind of draw pillars that hold up the house, the Colosseum, if you will, of media. But I think one of the really interesting things, as a lot of academics have been talking about, how do we describe today's media age, especially compared to the past one, is this concept of media hybridity, right? Hybrid media. And there you start to see these pillars, right, intersect or get blurry, right? The lines between news and entertainment are really murky, right? And there's like a deep lot we could talk for a real long time about if they were ever that clear to begin with, or how those pillars were constructed by newspapers, and that is really fascinating. But to kind of root it back to what we're dealing with right now, you're seeing news and entertainment intermingle in a variety of really different ways. And I think there maybe is the tendency to finger wag and to say, like, but that's not how it's supposed to be, right? And I think a little bit of that is sort of policing the normative boundaries of news must be hard. News must, you must like work at it. And it's only those of us that like can run the marathon that get to, say that we read news, right? So there is a finger wagging element of it. And certainly when we start talking about clickbait or sensationalism or even soft news, which are very much a form of that mixing, those critiques are really valid. But it also is a disservice to not appreciate or sort of make a distinction of other types of mixing of news and entertainment, which can, one, carry just as much factual information as sometimes traditional news. So I'm thinking of like The Daily Show, for example, which back in my day was hosted by Jon Stewart. Now you have Trevor Noah, you have John Oliver hosting a show on HBO, which same channel that has Game of Thrones, and that we don't associate with news at all. And that's that hybrid media world of what is news and what is entertainment. And those programs are arguably doing investigative work with John Oliver, right? His program has been called like investigative satire. The Daily Show with their kind of clips that are, poking fun of tropes or narratives in the mainstream media, that people can learn from that. And it can actually be a way to invite people in. And even to a lesser extent, so we want to not reduce everything to the same type of mixing, but you even have late night talk shows like the Jimmys in the US, right? You've got Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon and now
no,
Steve.
We don't have that over here. We watch your stuff.
Oh.
Everything you're saying, I know very well.
We
have the Jimmys and the Johns and
right. Sadly, not too many ladies in there, but yeah, Samantha Bee.
Hey, I'm gonna say this from all the way on this side of the world. Ain't got nothing to do with me. If I had the decision, different.
Right. So even those programs. And so, to go back to your original question, which is, this mixing and should we be worried about it? And they're distinct. I think we want to be mindful of some types of mixing of news and entertainment, which is largely profit driven, right? But I also want to allow new forms to emerge that might invite people into news, like your brother, right? That might change their perspective, that news doesn't necessarily have to be the hard work that you think it has to be.
I mean, it is hard to get news and to become, you need training and you need to be in the industry to call it that. But you said you kind of whizzed by a few phrases, which are the really big things that we want to get into. And I suppose when you're talking about Jon Stewart, the thing that comes to my head now is fake news, which was then satire, comedy, and fake news. But nowadays, fake news has a completely different meaning because of the last 4 years and the President Trump and what it was, fake news. Everyone, this thing became kind of almost a deterrent to any type of news. So if you didn't like an opinion piece or a factual piece of investigative journalism, it just didn't sit with you. You can just call it fake news now. And that's what I mean. But before, you knew who was doing the work. You knew kind of what a media network, where they sway, what kind of things they had in mind, what kind of messages they were sending across, whether it was investigative, whether it was entertaining, whether it was clickbaity. Back then would have been the contentious debate shows or the contentious or hyper, what would it be, the not like the 60 Minutes, but the big debate, like, for example, what would have happened with Bill Maher 20 years ago is not what would have been happening. Like, I didn't see it becoming, or, it was a different show. What was it called? I can't remember. Politically Incorrect, right? It's taken a different, like, all of these formats of communication and news that was supposed to get that educational element to a wider audience because of the element of satire. It's kind of moved away from now information. It's no longer sharing information and knowledge or opinions, hurling opinions at audiences and letting them, more so now just trying to retain the audience by playing these games of fake news here, watch this instead of that, he's saying this. It's a lot of pointing fingers from one media network to another. And it feels like the when you say they're intertwining from media networks and different, like, elements of social platforms and different kind of, they're mixing, but I still feel like there's a huge polarization from the media networks themselves because of the way they're presenting themselves in this way that is wagging the finger at each other, trying to discredit each other. And then it leaves the audience in a point of, you know what, sort your stuff out, because I'm not, anything that you say to me now, because of the multiple other avenues or portals of media that I have access to, I can just pick and choose, and you're not as important as you think you are anymore, and stop, and you're gonna lose me as a viewer. But in order for them to retain the viewer, they're just gonna, they're gonna win a war against another network. And it doesn't matter now about what the subject of the news is. It's just how short can the headline be so that I can get my click, so that I can, keep people engaged with my pages and my network and my products. It's no longer news. So I feel like now that I say that, I understand why my brother's response was, what, news? Because he's like, he gets his news from the portals that he knows and the subjects that interests him. And I feel like that happens everywhere, regardless of what industry you're in or I like football. Someone else likes hockey. They're going to watch different things. They're going to look at different avenues of news portals, different entertainers, whether it's athletes now becoming their own channels and their own mini little companies because of these platforms. So there is a lot going on in media,
Yeah,
in the
I
world
mean,
of media and how it's changing. But I bring it back to this. If the news, which was a source of kind of, just news, now is playing this game of, pointing the finger to get more views, where are we allowed to say whatever we want about the news now and just point the finger and say this is fake news and I don't like it because it doesn't sit with my opinion? Is that acceptable as a viewer?
okay, so lots of things to unpack there. And I want to make sure I end at
This is the conversation. So if you feel like you
yeah.
want to jump in when I'm talking, by all means do. I'll keep talking until someone tells me to shut up.
So a couple of things I want to push back on, but make sure I get back to the fake news part that we ended on. First, I sort of want to push against glorifying news of the past, right? And again, I understand that we've had we're hyper aware of some of the systemic problems in the news industry and the journalism industry right now because we're living it and we're seeing its consequences. But I do think there's a tendency to romanticize the golden era, if you will, of US journalism I'll speak about. And I hear this with the young people I interview, and they talk about like the Watergate scandal and like investigator, and I'm like, you were not alive then, but yet, they've seen the movies, that you grow up kind of socialized into this idea of what journalism was, and that it was this like high watermark of what we want journalism, the role we want journalism to have in a democratic society. So I do just want to push back that there was very little diversity in the news media industry, back in the day. Certainly women's voices, minorities' voices were not reflected. It was largely white men that were telling the news. And if you're talking about Walter Cronkite, very trusted, he signed off saying, and that's the way it is, right? And you just took that in. And there was some beauty in not having to second guess that or not turning the channel and hearing a completely different opposite way that it is. But let's not pretend that there weren't some real shortcomings to that there was an asymmetry in power also in play back in the day.
Okay.
Right.
So where are you going with this? Where are we going with this? I agree. I'm not. But as an industry, let's say if it was an industry professional standard, if we had a standard of reference, for us it was in the Arab world. You had Al Jazeera, BBC Arabic. I don't remember Monte Carlo. Those were the Arabic news stations when I was 15, 16, 17. Now you have Sky News, BBC, everyone, there's so many news channels. And the industry practice is the same. So they look the same, their visual representation is the same, You can flick from one news station to another, and it all visually looks the same. You have the head, you have the it all looks the same, which kind of gets consumers or viewers behavior. They know, okay, I'm watching news now. So that format and that was a product of that. And this is the industry that we're following, and we are now trusting and saying, okay, yes, there were shortcomings. Yes, nothing is perfect. But it is our reference when we talk about news, sure. and this is the industry that was built, and we can say the same about entertainment.
Look at the symbols that the Daily Show makes fun of, right? Like they're making fun of certain symbols, certain visuals that have been very much associated with news, right? You have the person who's a senior correspondent, assistant, intern, right? They have like a label that is supposed to construe some sort of like authority, and they have like the green screen, and they're like presenting something, and there's the B-roll, and all of that is sort of poking fun at the formula that is kind of how we storytell in certain mediums. So certainly you're seeing that carry through. I think the question though about market pressures and the mixing of news and entertainment in the US, it becomes kind of the big question is, what if high quality news is not profitable? What if that isn't getting the clicks? What if people aren't watching it as much as they watch like fun, like celebrity sports news, right? And I think what you're seeing is how organizations are wrestling with that. And if we were just in a market society, right, you would say like supply demand and give the people what they want, and like give me more cat videos and order up more football stories about like the local football star, right? But news is supposed to serve a democratic function, right? It's supposed to be this kind of protected media, even though we can think of these as pillars all in the Big Ten of media. There is at the same time something special about news, that we're supposed to protect it and uplift it because it is supposed to serve this democratic function.
That's kind of like, is there a blue tick for news now? Is there like the way you get verified? This is the verified user. This is the verified account of this guy. I have no blue ticks. I'm not verified. I don't exist.
So I actually
blue tick for news.
So here's a funny kind of tangent. I wrote a study called the blue check mark of credibility or something like that. And somebody tweeted at me and said, actually, it's a white check mark. It's a blue background with a white check mark. So now every time, I have a published paper that says blue check mark, but it's technically a white check mark. So I will concede that.
Yeah. Glad you're passing on the schooling of the person who told that to me. Look, oh my God, I just asked a question. Oh.
I know.
Right. The verified white mark, check mark with a blue background. Is there one of those for news?
Right. And a lot of people have batted that around, and I even had suggested that a couple times. And there is so Twitter is starting to develop different types of verification. So I think Twitter got in a little bit of a mess, in my personal opinion, in that they drastically increased the number of white check marks that they were giving out over the last.
Just call a blue tick.
I know.
Who a friend of yours is.
It wasn't my friend. It was a random person on Twitter.
Oh, no.
Which we know, they're to be listened to.
A perfect Twitter response.
Right. So they started verifying a lot of people, right? Which was fun for some people because you all of a sudden got the tick. But I think the byproduct of that was that it sort of lost any meaning. I think maybe like 3 years ago, one of the tips I would give people is like, well, is it a verified account? Because that sort of meant something. And right now, I'm not quite sure that means something anymore because, celebrities, movie stars, funny people that just have lots of followers because they say, provocative things, all of those people can have the tick mark. So it doesn't mean like professional adhering by journalistic values. So what Twitter is starting to do is try to develop different colors, blue background, right? Orange background, yellow background, just to sort of give you a little more frame of reference in, okay, this is a verified account, but in what area domain, right? Which isn't a full.
I understand but what I mean is, if I'm reading an article from, like, there's no, the way you said it was, and that's the way it was. That doesn't exist now. Mm-hmm. It's not the way it is. Anyone can say anything, and you can either get positive or negative responses from it. But there is no Like, is there a regulating body of the news? Because you said this idea of we should be a protected form of media. And because at the end of the day, when I want to watch the news, I'm trusting that what I'm consuming now is the correct information that's affecting my, my surroundings, or my neighborhood, or my geography or geopolitical or geoeconomic sources. Where does that, is there, because if you have an opinion piece or on Bloomberg, and then you go look at RT, or you look at France 24, or look at CNN, or look at CNBC, and they're sharing different numbers or different ideas or different stuff, which one is the right one? Which one
Right.
is the
So
accurate?
a couple different responses to that. And one is, this is something I hear a lot when I talk to people that I interview. And I was just talking to someone the other day who was talking about her frustration with COVID numbers in the US, and how when she turns on the television to see what, the latest status is with COVID in her area, her local TV news are reporting different numbers of cases, right? And she's just unsure, like, well, wait, and they're not just off by like a couple numbers, they're off by like percentage points. And so she's just confused as to what could be true. And I think that's a problem, right? And one that I'm going to follow up on and try to figure out why local news would have different, official reported case numbers. But more to the heart of it is, I think you have to have a way of contextualizing the larger environment. It's not all nihilism, right? It's not just that like it's every person for themselves because everyone is going to say something. It's really reductionist to put, in the US, I would say, Fox News in the same category as you put the AP, the Associated Press. Right? They're doing different things. They have different policies. They have a different track record. Both aren't perfect, right? But they do have a very different track record with, reporting journalistic, high quality news. And so I think that the way around that is to be able to contextualize the larger environment. We do a big disservice to people when we just start talking like red, blue media, right? Republicans, conservatives, liberal, liberals, media, like that makes it seem like there's no middle, that if you want just the facts, or if you want a news organization that by and large does not have a political viewpoint, you're not unsure where to go. So to circle back to your question, there's a couple like maps that are out there of mainly US, but they do include some global media that sort of map the media environment. So one I'd like to send people to is like the media bias chart. And it includes, I think they're up to over 100 different organizations. And what I like about that, it's a good thinking tool, not perfect.
Media biased, what's it called?
Media bias chart.
Okay, the media bias chart. I'm gonna put all of these things in the link for the YouTube video later.
Again, it's not perfect. My message is never to just like accept uncritically, but I do think it gives you a frame of reference. And what I like about that chart is that it's not static, it's constantly updating, and it's based on like a random content analysis of stories. They take like 20 stories every 2 weeks or something like that. And they, analyze the level of bias and the level of reporting quality. And so you get a big chart that's not simple. It's not just like good, bad, left, right. It's, trying to partition out the media environment in terms of original investigative research without a political viewpoint. And then original investigative research that skews more liberal, right? Or skews more conservative. And so again, it's not about just like believing this without accepting, but I do think it makes a lot easier when you see something on Twitter from the AP, and then you see something from RT, or then you see something from Fox News or Mother Jones, that you can better contextualize why the headline or the tweet might be different from the AP?
There's an element that we just kind of skipped on, which is the whole profit. I mean, if it was, I mean, we can't have a news regulating, because then it's just not going to be news, is it? Because if the regulator then tells you what to say and what you can't say, then it's not, you know, you can't regulate speech, you know. But at the same time, I mean, I manage a digital agency, and when I have to come up with ideas and slogans and catchy phrases to attract audiences to buy a product, without giving away all the skill, but you have to know what people are watching. And I cannot take that away from the news. The behavior is the same. We all use the same tools. We all use Facebook, we all use Google, we use our analytics to see who's clicking where, how long they're staying on it. And we're incentivized to spend more money, because the more money we spend, the more information we get. And that's the same thing with the news. I'm just don't want to focus a lot on the news, because your expertise, as you say, is audience insight, which is a bigger thing that I want to talk about. But I feel like we focus too much on the news. But the news, because it's driven, there's a third party that needs to consume, and there's dollars that need to spend to make sure that that message gets across. And it's whoever's spending that money really is the one in control of that message, or who consumes that message, especially when you have optimized messaging. You know, you'll spend $100 for this and you do a digital campaign, and then they will tell you, actually, if you change this and change that and change this and reduce this content and spend this much more, it will reach this audience and it will reach that audience, and it will give you all of these, you know, it's just kind of teasing you to spend more so that you get more clicks. And the media and the news is driven by the same basic principle, is I want more eyes on my screen, because that turns into dollars. And they're looking at it saying, okay, what kind of news can I spin? Or what kind of headline can I market? Because that's what it is. It's not news, you know, it's marketing headlines that will get you clicks. But let's just move away from news, because this same basic principle is used in online retail, it's used in entertainment, it's used in everything that is to do with the new forms of consuming media, mm-hmm. which is what we are, you know, living in now. Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, you know, all of these portals. And they're TikTok, for example, another one. They just it's like, yeah, you know, another one. Why? But there are all these mediums that come out, and the more you spend, the more views, the more information you gather. The more information you gather, the more re-spending and recapturing you can do of that audience. Because at the end of the day, if I'm a business, I'm selling a product, I want to know how much I'm going to get out of the advertising money that I'm spending. And that brings us to the learnings of audience and consumer behavior on new media. And all of these learnings are also driving news. So it's not just so that you can promote your new film on Netflix, or you want to sell your shoes on Facebook or Instagram. It's also because you want to talk about 360 people killed in a drone strike, you know, or 70,000 people dying from COVID. Like, it's the same principle. And the same kind of, it's always backed by someone spending money to get it to you. And when there's money involved, it's always a little murky.
Yeah, and I want us to move more towards media in general, but I do think the question you're asking relates to business models and funding models, and whether the same funding models for media, for you know, movies, should exist for news. And in the US, I think we're starting to see, you know, the impact of that, where high quality investigative news is, you know, not always very profitable, right?
No, it's not.
And advertising, especially because it costs money, right? It like costs money to employ people to do long-term projects.
Yes.
And so that business model of like, well, how is it financially viable? Well, let's cut reporters. Let's make the story, sexier. Let's, how do we get eyeballs, right? That model can have some really dangerous consequences, which maybe we're seeing right now. If we are sticking to pursuing that type of business model. So at least in the US, a lot of economic scholars, journalism scholars have been, suggesting that maybe we need to rethink policies that address this a little better, sort of similar to kind of public funded, like BBC, or tax breaks that news organizations can get, similar to what you give churches or religious institutions. Like, is there a way to not just let the market forces dictate what's going to be profitable? Because everything we know about people is saying that like what they want to give their attention to after a hard day at work, or
cats killing, playing ping pong and jumping on sofas. That's pretty much what the world's interested in, apparently.
Me too.
Views on that, and
Me too. I'm interested in that too. So I'm not, so I think that's like a big, broad, like cultural, systemic argument, which is like, should the same funding model apply to news that we apply to other things that are more entertainment-y, more towards the question of audience insight and those tactics? I like to frame it slightly more self-serving and slightly better in saying, I want journalists now to not lose their news judgment, but for so long, journalists didn't have to think about their audiences. It was just like, I will write this important story and smart people will read it if they know what's good for them, right? And there just was no thought about audience, right? And it was maybe, like, we have some research that talks about journalists back in the day, like in the 70s, would say, well, I'm writing for my friend, someone just like me, right? Or when they'd be asked to write about like a woman's issue, like shopping at the grocery store, well, I'll write for someone like my wife. And that was like as big as thinking about the audience. But there was this hesitation that thinking about your audience would get in the way of your kind of journalistic professional values. Today, I think we don't want to move all the way to the point of like advertising. Think like an advertiser. Think like an influencer. How are you going to get people to click? How many, look at your metrics. Write more stories that are going to get more clicks. What is the churn rate? Like, I think there's a danger in moving too far into the attention economy, right?
Yeah.
But I do think there is a sweet spot, which is, how do you tell important stories, right? And that's that journalistic training of identifying important stories, interviewing people, being a good communicator, and being able to tell those stories. How do you get that to people who need to hear it, right? And that's
what you're describing there is that you have to become a journalist. It's not journalism is not, it's not something that you can just easily become a journalist today. Not just because you have a camera anywhere and whatever, it's not everyone is a journalist either. And that's what I mean. Where is that, is everyone supposed to plaster their accreditations or their credentials on their profile and get a tick because of it? Or is it their track record? Is it, at the same time, it's not always going to be positive and lovely and fluffy and, oh, look at the teddy bears and candy floss in the festival that we have. That's not journalism. There's real things. There's investigative, there's reporting, there's documentary films. There's so many ways of getting your message across. But I feel like when we don't focus on the audience, it's more room to explore your subject. Because now, when we look at it, you're looking at the audience. I know you mentioned it of of writing for your friend, or because of the limitations, or it was basically your opinion of the world. It was your individualistic view, and that's what you're writing from. But now I feel like if we have to please everyone,
you don't, you should.
And clicking, and we need to get those numbers. Not by please everyone, I mean please our numbers, and our audience give us those numbers. So if we are looking too much into our audience, we'll end up into this conversation where we're like, what's going on? Because a lot of it is trying to get eyes on the media, or on your page.
Absolutely. But I think knowing your audience goes deeper than that, right? Like, who are you writing for? Right. And I'm sorry to put it in like writing terms, but the same principle is for television or audio or whatever. You need to know.
Oh my God, you're so old.
Your pen and writing in cursive. No. You need to know something about who you're writing for, and at bare minimum, like how much background information they know. And this is where I get myself in a little bit of hot water at a journalism school, because I start tearing down some of the traditional journalistic conventions of storytelling, which is like the inverted pyramid, which is the first opening paragraph. You need to load people up with the who, where, what, why. Like, you just give them all the like basic information about names, cities, titles, and then it's the funnel. Then things get more descriptive from the bottom, and that serves a very production standpoint, because if a print newspaper was running over in physical pages, they would cut from the bottom, right? So like the important stuff is supposed to be at the top, so you can just cut a story from the bottom. But as we've started to study like how people with low levels of knowledge or familiarity in a subject like read and encounter and understand and process information, we found that formula is really hard. That people will confront that opening paragraph where it's just name dropping all of these terms and people whose names you don't know and their positions and cities that you've never been to, and they just check out. They're like, well, I don't understand anything in that paragraph.
This is not for me.
Thank you very much. I'm going to see myself out. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying thinking about your audience. Sure, there is an element, especially when we talk about social media editors that are employed in news organizations, that are thinking, very similar to what you were mentioning. But I think for a lot of journalists, it's more, how much knowledge does your audience, your target audience have, and how can you be mindful in how you're telling your story that eases people into the structures they need to build in their comprehension. Another example very quickly is just and this is another writing based one, though you can do it with talking also, is what is the reading level that your story is written at? And this is always a fun one for college students, because they're like trying to drop those long words and they have sentences. And then
look at my vocabulary.
Right. There's a lot
vocabulary.
Yep. There's a lot of like thuses and therefores and
yes.
plethora.
Hitherto.
Yeah. And to run that through, you can, in Microsoft Word, you can very easily run that through a reading comprehension. It'll tell you what reading level that your story, whether it's spoken or not, is at. And, they're always like in the 12th grade level, right? So like college level, the average reading level in the US is 8th grade. So if you, and that's that's the preferred reading level. If you're going to work at BuzzFeed, it's lower, I believe, at BuzzFeed, USA Today, Vox, those papers, those organizations are all very adamant and aware of reading level. And so you need to write so people can comprehend. But if isn't
that increasing the risk of misinformation though for a lot of people? Because if you have I mean, that's an interesting fact. Eighth grade. I've never
Now, if you're writing for The Economist or The New York Times or The New Yorker, those are more at 12th grade. So you're fine. Add those, use the word plethora, go for it. So that's what I mean. Yeah, and I maybe this is where you're going, but I also think it's simplifying does not mean dumbing down, right? And
it's accessibility, right? If I want to tell you a story about something, and I don't, really explain the basics of, I'm going to start here, go here, and then you'll know at the end. You won't, and then it's kind of like, if we're talking, we're having a conversation now. I'm understanding you, you're understanding me. There's a level of understanding between us that doesn't happen if you wrote a paper and I read it, because that thing is gone. Whereas if you're writing it for me, knowing that I have that level of 8th grade capacity of understanding, and you throw in all of these big words, I'm throwing it away. This is not meant for me. It's not, you're not, or you're just showing off because you know more words than me, and I'm never going to look at you again.
Now I dislike you a lot.
Yeah, a lot, So if that's the case, if I know that I'm churning out content that big words, a lot of it will make my audience and my readers if it's going to get them away from my page or from my articles or from my information page, am I not allowing more room to get away with fake news or misinformation or saying things that, because at the end of the day, I feel like what the purpose of it is to raise awareness and information about what's going on. Mm-hmm. And if I'm writing at a level that the recipient of this doesn't get, I'm allowed to, add more things that a lot of people won't understand, which gives me more room of saying, they won't understand this, let me slide this in for the smart people. You know what I mean? Like there's a polarization of your audience through, what are you telling people? That's the thing. What is it coming at me? And if it's coming at me in dumbing down and simple, it's clickbait. You know what I mean? Now I'm at a page where I'm like, no. You know what I mean? This is not for me, kind of thing.
Yeah, I would maybe frame it slightly different in that we know there's this problem where news tends to be written at a higher level, right, than maybe it should be if it's trying to tell these important stories and reach the general population. And I would say, like, okay, well then who's doing it really well? And then a lot of the research that came out a couple years ago when we first started talking about fake news analyzed, stories that had been identified as fake news, so factually incorrect, and found that those were shorter stories and they were written at a much more accessible level and they had much more simple headlines. And so you sort of see that asymmetry emerging from this, right? Like, who's understanding their audience and understanding how to tell a story in a simple but very wrong and incorrect way. It's oftentimes these strategic, creators of disinformation. So my goal is, like, how can we need to smarten up, right? And use some of the same principles and understanding, but for good, for journalistic good, because people are using those same principles and understanding to put out low quality, bad information. So, we want to make sure that it's not just creators of disinformation that are the ones that understand how to get something in front of people. So the big challenge is, how do you not sacrifice quality when understanding kind of the attention economy and also trying to make money? Not simple.
If we solve it in the next 30 minutes, we'll be billionaires. So
yeah, call me.
There.
No ideas. Call me. I'm not
this is not profit driven. We're not about profit.
Yeah.
Let me just check if we have an audience and a question from the audience? No, we're good. Can
I ask you a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm going to ask you a question about the U.S. Okay. Where do you think, what form of media, where are people, the majority of U.S. adults getting their news about politics and the election?
Adults, sorry, made adults, so over 30, over 18?
No, over 18. So U.S. adults, what do you think they're saying in a survey that what is the primary way that they are getting news about the political election or political news?
Twitter.
Oh, see. What percent of the U.S. population do you think is on Twitter?
Is it above 25%?
Oh, it's below.
Really?
Yeah. So let me get back to the first question. So it's about if you, it's about the top, if you sort of collapse the different types of television, is television at 45%, say TV, whether that's local, national, or cable, is the number one way that they get news. Social media is about like 18%. So there is a percent of the population that primarily say that's the number one way they get news, but it is sometimes surprising for people to realize that television, even though it's sort of like an old school medium, television is still the number one way that people in the US are getting their news.
Okay.
And then the follow-up is just, I love asking people about Twitter because we hear so much about Twitter. And
it's making a lot of noise, isn't it?
Right. And a lot of us in the media industry are on Twitter, but really it's I think we're down to like 18% of the US population is on Twitter. So it's really a small percentage if we're thinking about
mainstream media are using tweets. Like it's not my fault for thinking that, because it's going on, you go on to CNN, you go on to whatever, they're taking screenshots of tweets and they're talking about them. Look how many retweets. They're discussing Twitter.
It's President Trump's favorite social media site. So
indeed. That's interesting. Thanks for letting me know. I honestly thought that the social media penetration there was much, much higher over the US. But,
well, so the question is the primary source. So depending on it as like your number one source. Certainly lots of people get news from social media, but is it your number one way?
For government, politics, TV is still the form. Right. And in that study, are you including satire? Did they include things, or was it just mainstream news channels? So it would be.
And this was a 2019 study from Pew, and I believe the options were that you got to pick from were social media sites, online websites, radio, print newspapers, and then the 3 different types of TV. So it was asking you which one of these would you say is your primary way of getting news about the election and politics.
Okay. So audience insight, which is your forte, area of expertise. When I read it, first thing I think about is that you're the person who is tracking all people's behaviors when it comes to consumption. Is that correct? Is it safe to assume that's what you're doing? Are you analyzing what people are viewing, and are you interested in what they're consuming? Is that the job of audience insight, or is that the specification?
No, I would say, I mean, you'll get a different answer maybe when you talk to people that work at news organizations and are maybe employed as a audience growth specialist or audience engagement manager, or insert whatever title.
Head of metrics engagement.
Right. I would say my role, and here, sorry to get all wonky and academic, is much more to understand what people are doing and how they place value in media. And certainly one way that we can think about value is through what people are clicking on, or where they're going, or what they're, where they're scrolling. And, we have a lot of very frighteningly scary ways to track that now. And that's certainly one part of it. But I would say the other part, which is becoming, I think, more and more important as we get all this bigger digital trace data, I think we're realizing the limitations of that. And I think there's a big importance to understand the why question. And that's something metrics can't tell you. Why do you click on the cute little video of the cat, right?
No, but if the cute little, the reason is if they click on the cute little video of the cat, they want to know the why is not the psychometric. I think it's more of, okay, if I want to sell more of whatever, I'll tag it to a cat video or I'll buy my media. I think the motive for it is always to sell more. It's not.
But how do you sell more? And this is a classic concept from consumer behavior, is you have to understand the value that people place. Certainly, to use an entertainment example, God, I don't know if this example will translate, but there was this horrific movie called Sharknado, which was... Don't even know, but I'll look it up. Sharknado. You might be able to infer by the title. It was about like this tornado that hit somewhere in the US that like put sharks in it.
Oh, yeah. Sharknado.
So,
I just saw the poster. Let me see it.
Yeah.
Enough said. Can I show you this? I think we can. Look at it. This is sharks. Okay, so, why are you talking about this? Go ahead.
So you might glimpse from that lovely artwork that it's not maybe going to win Oscars. It's not the highest quality of acting or drama, but it was fairly popular. And it's an example of people kind of hate watching, right? Of like making fun of something, like enjoying watching something, but that doesn't mean it's high quality, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you should all of a sudden create like a horse-nado and a dog-nado and a cat-nado and like a series of these things. It means that you hit something really good. You need to understand why and understand how it fit into their lives and how you might be able to create something similar, but you shouldn't think that people were watching that because it was the best thing ever. You need to understand that they were watching it because they threw a party and were mocking it while they were watching it with their friends. And so
someone was just really, really into sharks, and there was a massive group of people that really wanted to know what sharks would behave in a tornado.
So another example would be like a couple of years ago, the New York Times most clicked on story, right? Most clicked on story was a quiz, right? It was a linguistic quiz that you like answered 30 questions, and then it would tell you like what part of the country you were from. It would try to guess from how you say words. Is the lesson in that like the New York Times needs to like put a pause on like writing stories and maybe get into the quiz business? Like, I don't think that's the message. Instead, you want to understand what people got out of that.
Yeah, but was it at the end of the quiz, did they get sold a subscription to the Times for $2.99 a month? Was that the objective of the massive clicking? That's what I mean. Is it not an incentive to see how many people would click and then drive that towards more subscriptions and more consumption of the Times, rather than it being consumer behavior and us understanding more of the psychometrics of people clicking and why they're clicking and what time of, like if we're looking at your example of Sharknado.
It's a good one.
It is a very good I could say this about independent filmmakers, they're doing their thing, and they know that they're going to festival circuits or not, or they're in their circle, and then maybe if they're like really, really, really unbelievable, they will win an award and it will go onto a SVOD platform or might make it to a few local theaters. It's not always the case that it's going to be sold out premieres all over the world. You know what I mean? But that industry on its own is doing its thing for its people. You know, these are our dudes. We're all indie filmmakers. We all know our thing. But also, if as an independent filmmaker, if you did something and caught someone's eye, you might get a commercial deal. You know what I mean? So there's always an incentive to do something more than what is already in. So maybe this, I'm just asking because when you talk about the quiz clicking, maybe it was, you know, it was a marketing thing from the Times that ended, and it was only incentivized or made because they wanted more subscriptions and not because they really wanted to know what people sounded like in around, you know what I mean?
I mean, I think there's, I think, yes. I think a lot of time, we spend a lot of time talking about the engagement ladder, right? And sometimes when I go into media organizations and a lot of newsrooms, there's the like, we need to be on Pinterest, or right now it's like, we need to be on TikTok. And then they're like, and TikTok's going to get us subscribers. And I'm like, oh, like that's like, if you're looking to like transform TikTok into like people that are going to sign up for your newspaper subscription, like that's, people don't start from the bottom step and go up to the very top. There's
not ready. Does that mean that the we are not ready for this age of communication and media?
No, I think what it means is that you have to understand how you build relationships with someone to where they will pay money for something that in the back of their mind, they might be thinking, but can't I get that for free elsewhere? I mean, the truth, which I really do believe, is like, no, actually you can't. Like, you do need to pay for or somebody needs to pay for quality news.
We won't tell you who, but someone's got to pay.
Right. So you're not, it can't, you won't get the same thing just for free, but there are free things out there. And so the idea that you're going to ask somebody to pay for something that they, at least on face value, think that they can get for free is the high ladder. And so how do you get somebody from step 1 to step 10? And a lot of times it's these baby steps of gaining relevance in their lives. And you've said a couple times, like, news is not meant for me, or that's not for me. And I do think, especially with a lot of young people, that's the like challenge. The big challenge is they associate news, to come back to what we started with something that doesn't impact their lives, doesn't tell stories about, they tell stories about taxes and houses and, parenting, and, maybe that's not you.
That's important stuff.
It is, but it's not for you, right? Necessarily. And so a lot of what happens on social media is, and I think Instagram's a good example of this, with the media, like New York Times or BuzzFeed, or even, Snapchat with the Discover feature, is trying to get people in the habit of consuming your news. And, getting them to share, getting them to identify a little bit as somebody who, like, I posted a New York Times quiz, and I got a lot of likes, and people were like, oh my gosh, this was great. It pinpointed exactly where I was born. Right. And all of a sudden now you're like, the New York Times. I mean, you're still on like ladder 2. Let's not pretend. But I think it's this long-term game of like getting people in the habit and gaining more relevance with people. So when they come to that point when maybe they have extra money and they've gotten out of college and they're like, all right, first job, I should, subscribe to a news organization. It's not, they already have a relationship with the news organization. So that's what I think, the engagement ladder is sort of useful for thinking about, is not turning what's happening on Twitter into subscriptions, because that's a big ask. And I don't think many people are like, no, thank you.
I mean, you're just reminding me of like 100 meetings that I've had this week where it's getting corporates to understand, first of all, how to use these mediums. If you're a bank and you're on Twitter, or if you're a bank on TikTok, first of all, I don't know why a bank needs to be on TikTok, right? But if you are a bank and you're an investment bank and you want to open up a TikTok channel for some reason, I would advise them to fire their head of marketing or whoever came up with that idea, because there's mediums that you just don't belong in. You know what I mean? But we keep giving them value because we want that click and we want that. And it's this kind of vicious cycle where, okay, if I pay to put my ad on here and it's a reduced 1 minute clip or a 1 minute video of a longer news story than I want you to go and watch on YouTube, or I can sell you a subscription to my newspaper. There's ways, each one has its own format and its own audience and its own tools and its own reason for existing. And it's very, very hard to convince paying customers that what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah, I would say it's the one area where young people, I'll speak about my students, like young people sometimes have the advantage in the hiring market because there is the assumption that like young people know social media. And so, you know, when a company, when a bank is like, you know, we
should totally troll our, you know, we should do a troll campaign. That will get us. It's like, dude, no, don't troll. You're doing
right. So young people do often find themselves in these social media positions because they know the rules, right? Yeah. They know the social norms, and that becomes really important when you're going to inhabit a space like TikTok or Facebook, or, you know, well, lots of people are on Facebook now. Facebook is sort of like the television of social media, but particularly Snapchat, right? Snapchat, not very user friendly. Like it's sort of like cumbersome to like figure out. And a little bit of that is done on purpose because, you know, they don't want it to be a mass media, right? They only want, you know, the people that understand and play around to get it. So yeah, social media is fraught with people wanting to be where people are, right? And that sometimes is not the strategic decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's always this. I mean, you come up with a concept, and they tell you, oh, we need this concept to turn into a business, and our business communications need to be. It's just this lack of understanding with money. It's never a good thing, you know. For me, I feel like, okay, you could spend this money wisely elsewhere, but it's this mindset of we have to follow the audience, we have to know what our audience is doing, we have to understand what they want, we have to give them what they want. And I feel like that just takes it away from you as an individual or as a company or as a news organization or a country, that you have a basic, you know, you have not a, there's a, so if I said to you, McDonald's, there's something there. It's already there. There's an identity to it. You will know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you go into these different tools, you're doing more harm for yourself than, you know, than others. You're doing more harm to yourself because you're trying to, you know, change your identity to fit something that, or to penetrate a group that really, really, really just wants cat videos and kids dancing. You know what I mean? And the new TikTok stuff that's going on that I'm terrible at. All these, I don't even have a TikTok, but you know, whatever. It's like a question that I get asked, and I'm like, just don't. You know, you're selling real estate. You know, the users on TikTok, they're not gonna take your ad and give it to their parents. Like, that's just not gonna happen. You're a real estate firm. You don't need to belong on TikTok.
Right. So, I mean, that's what I think insight is there are so many distribution channels now, right? Yeah. Even when we think of social media, right? Like which social media, and then depending on which one, you have to craft your story very differently. So it's being smart about those choices, right? It's not just, you know, let's do a social media campaign, but it's like, okay, based on the story based on who you're trying to target, it seems like the smart decision would be Instagram, right? And then let's talk about how we tell a story on Instagram, because it's very different than how we would tell a story on Twitter or Facebook.
Okay, why is everyone doing stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think stories, I mean, what was the original stories, Instagram or Snapchat?
Snapchat.
Snapchat. And then Instagram borrowed it.
And then
And now it's on Facebook.
That's on Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter stories, LinkedIn stories. I don't know. It's just another
Yeah, I mean,
another medium for more engagement. Like
yeah.
the engagement factors now, when you look at Instagram, IGTV, stories, feed, when it first came out, it was all about how many likes. Now, if you have 50,000 followers and 100 likes on your image, you know, it's normal because you're getting 49,000 views on your IGTV,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Or your story. So the even the audience behavior has changed, and what is attracting them has changed. But I feel like once there's something that works, everyone's going to copy it and see if they can take their piece of the pie. But
yeah, absolutely. And
we have a question from the audience. Sorry, go ahead. No,
go ahead.
No, go. Tell me. It's a conversation. They're listening to us talk.
Yeah, I mean, social media has been around for so long that now it's old. It has old problems like conglomerates, right? So now Facebook owns Instagram, or Facebook tries to buy these other places. So now, you know, what Instagram was good at, you're now starting to see.
Years. It's not that long. It's 15 years, 16 years. That's not a lot of time. By the way, to get, I mean, that in a leap on its own is why I asked if we were ready. But, you know, because it takes people a lot longer to get used to things, I think. And 20 years is no time for the whole world to understand that this is all going on. You know what I mean? And this is a big deal. Like,
I mean, I'll show my age here, but I got an Instagram account my last year of college. But now, I mean, I imagine a lot of your audience may have lived a majority of their life on Facebook. Certainly a lot of my students have, you know, got a Facebook account when they were 10 maybe. And that's, I mean, that growing up in that type of world is just very distinct.
We work with, so part of our production, we have a lot of kids. So we have talents and whether it's commercials or whatever. Anyway. But we had a group that came into our office. It was 6, 7, and 8 years old. And those was around 25, around that age group, and they all had TikTok. They all had TikTok. I almost lost my mind. The fact that a 7-year-old had an iPhone 11, it was just like, what is going on?
I bet they were really like technology. I mean, there's a good side to it, you know, like they know how to create media and like edit stuff and filters. And I'm like, have to go to my niece and I'm like, can you teach me how to do?
Yeah. If I ever need an update or whatever, it's like, hey, little bro, what's going on? Or, you know, just someone else who's younger than me, at least 10, 15 years. Anyway, back to the audience question.
Yeah.
If social media becomes too big of a monopoly, will governments try to regulate it, or is it too late? From Virginia Green.
Excellent question. I think we're seeing that right now. Like Facebook has the monopoly, right? Facebook is the television of social media in the US and worldwide, right? Especially if we start thinking about Facebook's presence in countries like the Philippines, where they literally are bringing the internet and like have hardwired the country. And so when you talk about internet access in the Philippines, you're talking about Facebook, right? Yes, they're absolutely too big. They do need to be regulated. Do I think they will be regulated? Am I hopeful that will solve all our problems? No.
I think from another side is that the government is more interested in the data that these things are having. I think I'm more worried about trusting the governments of what the information that they'll have. You know, if you're going to regulate social media, yes, there's regulations for advertising and how to advertise and TV
But
and
that's super recent. Like, I'll speak in the US context, right? Like, we heavily regulate advertisements, especially political advertisements on television.
yeah,
But for some reason, the internet was just like too hard to classify. And so was not regulated. And Facebook fell under that of like, I don't know. And I think largely it's because people don't understand the technology. And by people, I mean elected officials who tend to be older, don't understand Facebook and how people were using it. And so in the 2016 election, there was numerous examples of, dark money, foreign interference, like where unknown people who weren't in the US, that's the best I'll say, were purchasing advertisements about the election, right? And they could do that because Facebook was not, their ads that they were accepting and showing were not regulated. And so when we talk about regulation, I'm not talking about like government having hands on your data. I'm more talking about what Facebook's feet to the fire and what we are making Facebook tell us about their procedures. Like another crazy example is, Facebook, when we all sign those terms of agreement, you like click that.
It takes me 4 days to read them.
Right. Well, yeah. Read them. They're experimenting, on their users all the time. And a couple of years ago, there was a study that was in-house done by Facebook where they were trying to manipulate people's emotions to make them kind of be sad or happy, and then like adjust what posts that they would show them to like make them more sad or make them more happy, and figure out whether that gets more engagement. You can see the like media logic behind that. But when you look at it from an ethical standpoint, it's like, you can't just like all of a sudden unknowing to people.
Looking at it from a dollar perspective, it's not a
right. So these are the examples where, when I'm talking about Facebook being regulated, that's where I think somebody could be watching.
They all have their own, like all of them have their own policies, and like Twitter would report things, YouTube would bar things, Instagram. The other day, I can't remember what I was doing, but I had a sensitive filter on my Instagram content. So it was warning people that what I was about to show was, sensitive or whatever. I can't remember what I was doing. But it's the fact that already exists in the hands of the service provider.
But it's inconsistent.
Of course it's inconsistent. And it's not supposed to be. An independent regulator should be the one who is, because now if I don't like you, I'll just block your content. And we have that a lot here, by the way, with YouTube. It's region specific or certain words in Arabic that we write in English. Mm-hmm. And, they're all like, oh, what is this word? Block. And you just get an email saying, like, I'm putting on content about football and culture and calm down, Well,
so the Hunter Biden laptop example, this is a very U.S. example, so apologies, but during the last during the 2020 election, like a couple days before election day, there was this story that came out, the New York Daily News, that Hunter Biden, son of Joe Biden, up to some shady dealings. His laptop broke, and you bring it into a shop, and apparently the shop guy was like, I think there's some shady dealings on this laptop. And so how the social media sites dealt with that video was very different, right? Like YouTube just said, we're not doing any, like, it's going to live there. We're not touching it. Twitter suspended the Daily News until they could kind of figure out what was happening. And they got a lot of blowback for that. And then Facebook's response was to not block or suspend, but to like tinker with their black box algorithm, which we know some things about, but we don't know what the secret sauce really is. But they were kind of tinkering with their algorithm to reduce the significance of that story. And And so you're seeing sites operate independently, but I do think there's no way they would be doing those things if they hadn't had some government pressure. And if I want to be really, really candid, I would say that the EU is doing much more work in this area than the US. I think the US was sort of behind, even though they felt the effects of it in the last election. I think the EU has really been at the forefront with, demanding data privacy cookie disclosures, which are annoying, but, at least trying to make people recognize that what their data is being used for and how they're being kind of sold and targeted in these spaces.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we started the conversation talking about how to, tell fake news apart and why it's fake news. And now I feel like the common thing here is the user and the audience. And if we're going to regulate what type of content to give, we should also let people make their money as well, because now it's driven by profit and it's causing these problems. But if we want to enforce regulation and it's going to get in the way of economies and business, and because these tools have made a lot of people a lot of money. It's not just the people who are owners or on the board or whatever, but the YouTube influencers, the YouTube channels, the Instagram influencers, the TikTok influencers, the brands. This has made a lot of people a lot of money. And if this becomes, these are all user-generated platforms. Like, you can sign up, put up your content. No one's tying you down and telling you to film yourself dancing on TikTok. You know what I mean? It's all voluntary. You say yes and you put it up. And if these are elements of people that are there for these people to be able to grow and create, and content is king and we all should push towards more content and create more content, and then we have a regulation, it will stop people from expressing themselves. And then you're into a completely different conversation, which is about speech and rights and that kind of thing, and representation and diversity. And whereas all of these things now are at the control of the service provider. It's Facebook which dictates.
And largely has been hands off. I think there are a couple steps when we talk about regulation. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you can say, right? I think there are some regulation steps in what are you promoting. If it's somebody that is saying, and in the US, right, there are limits to First Amendment, right? You can't post something that's going to spark or incite violence or harm to the public. And so does Facebook have some responsibility in the ad money that they accept, or the way that their algorithm functions, if it's going to promote those types of things? I think that's one type of regulation. And I think you're right in saying that could be a rolling ball that like picks up steam, and now all of a sudden it's like something that maybe is more common in China, where there are certain words that you cannot, that will be flagged and you cannot say. So I definitely want to be aware of the continuum of regulation, but I don't think just because you're starting to ask Facebook to, I think governments applying pressure so Facebook is more transparent and allows people more options to control their data or see who's targeting them. I think those are all things I'm in favor of that stop short before we're talking about like what stories can you tell.
Yeah, I think the implications of it in this side of the world are very different. As much as I understand where you're coming from, and here there's governments that completely just, will remove access to internet if they need to. You can't even use certain services. So it's not. I think the question boils down to do you trust the government if that's the case? If you want the regulations to be, if there's a federal regulation on the use and how to promote on these tools in the US, I think that will not, certainly is not a quick solution. It's not like a plaster.
No. Yeah. And I mean, Facebook's not, it's not in their best interest. And so they're not really running at the prospect of
but I mean, not just Facebook. Look at Google, for example.
Right. Same
Google
thing.
And YouTube, when we started talking about TV, YouTube is the longest, fastest growing platform out of all of these mediums since the creation. Like has it passed 500 million users or something like that yet around the world? It's year on year, it is it's a force to be reckoned with. It's the second stop search engine after Google.
Yeah.
It's not just, everyone assumes YouTube is, YouTube, you make YouTube videos, lovely. It's like, no, there's a lot of stuff going on with YouTube.
Yeah.
Product endorsements, advertising, tagging, backlinking, descriptions, what kind of links to put in your description to get money, how to brand it, how to endorse brands. Woo!
Yeah.
And that's one platform.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I did here's a good example of some audience research. Over the summer, I was, asking people about the media they use and where they're getting information about COVID in the US and the presidential election. And I was getting a handful of people that kept telling me that they watch news on YouTube, like YouTube channels, or, I don't have a television, I'm watching on my phone or a laptop, YouTube. And so I started to get intrigued with what is the YouTube news experience? And is it the same as just what you would see on TV, or is there something different about it? So I went ahead and did a content analysis of, I think it was 7 different YouTube news channels that varied in whether they were partisan on the right or left, mainstream news media, and then by size. So whether they were, had 10 million subscribers, or whether they had 30,000 subscribers, to sort of see what smaller channels might be able to do. And one of the interesting findings were that smaller channels were much more likely to have an array of audience engagement strategies. So talking directly to you using I and we and us language, telling personal anecdotes, saying what you did, yesterday, or you're gonna, so personal disclosures.
What you had for breakfast, that fried egg that you won't tell me about.
Right, exactly. And the byproduct of that, I think, is that people feel a lot closer to these YouTube channels that are delivering information, and some of them were pretty crazy and in the kinds of stories that they were telling. But I can see how subscribers would feel a lot more engaged in that type of dissemination, because it's much more personalized.
And is that just a format of content? I mean, that's like calling facts opinions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
I like the way they're telling me the story, so I'll just keep listening.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what worries me a lot when we start talking about partisan polarization is, there's some studies that have come out of the Pew Research Center that show how bad the U.S. public is at identifying factual statements from opinion statements. So something like, President Obama was born in the U.S., right? That's a factual statement. Versus something like, immigrants that are in the country illegal are a big problem. Opinion statement. And, so Pew tested this, whether, had people read these statements and say, is this a factual statement or an opinion statement, regardless of whether you agree with it or not? And it turns out people were not that good at it. And for all that we bemoan young people are better at it than old people. Older people, not
It's
so
their
good.
thing, though. For sure it is. They were born into this thing.
Right.
We both had to learn how to use a computer, didn't we?
Yes.
There you go. Right?
Yeah.
It's inherent into their... For me, the whole point is to encourage this dialogue, because there is a gap, whether viewers here are old or young or...
Yeah. So just to circle back, I think some of it...
Have conversations. Yes, I understand your point about the way it's said, and they'll build an affinity with them, and they'll watch it because they like the host, or they like the casual sense of the news that these guys are presenting. That's not news.
Right. And that's scary. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's also the same thing. Like, what is news going to do to, what is,
Exactly. Like, what are we going to do if that's the cards that are stacked against us? And I think for consumers, just to kind of circle back here, I think, when I get asked, like, what can I do to, combat disinformation or misinformation, or what as an individual can I do? And my answer is always, one part, understand technology, right? Understand how algorithms are working, understand, like, lift up the hood of the car on Facebook and like see how they're targeting you. Understand how Google shows you search returns. And then the other part, because it's not just all technology, is us, humans, human nature, and how we process information and the things that we give our attention to. And so
cat videos. That's what it is. It's cat videos. It's cat videos and people falling off of skateboards.
Well, we know that we pay more attention to negative stories than positive stories. Yeah. We're more likely to trust something that agrees with our viewpoints than challenges our viewpoints. Flashy photos or images, we're more likely to spend more time paying attention to. So again, I'm not saying we're going to stop doing that, or all of a sudden, we're not going to have these biases, but I do think part of it is recognizing that, oh man, I'm actually not that good at telling what's fact from opinion. Yeah. What can I do about that? Or do I automatically love this tweet because it is something that makes me feel good about myself? Yeah. And, so it's some of that internal reflection, I think, will also help, but it's certainly not going to solve the supply of it.
I think we've done an hour and a half, and I'm getting messages to stop talking. I really feel like we have not covered a lot, and it's just a huge topic. But I had, if I may, just one last question. Yeah. Okay. They didn't say no. So that's not a no if I didn't get it quickly. Just that last point that you said, so that there's a take home. If we can wrap it up with a take home, there is personal responsibility and there's public responsibility. Do you feel like before giving advice or the public opinion, we should look at the individual? So look at yourself, understand what you are doing, and understand that this is, you need to tell the difference between an entertainment medium and a news medium, and like there's a lot of things, like you said, on YouTube. It's entertainment, it's not news all the time. So, and who is their responsibility? Is it just back to the individual? Is it you as an adult responsible for knowing what you're consuming?
Yeah, and I know I'll try to be brief. Yeah, academics are not always brief, but I actually asked this question on a survey a couple years ago to a survey of U.S. adults, that who had the most responsibility in combating the spread of fake news or disinformation, and the number one response, or the portion of the pie, if you will, that had the highest percent of responsibility was citizens. And then followed about equally by much lower by government, tech companies, and journalists. So I do think that we see ourselves as maybe what we have the most confidence in, and so I think all slices of the pie are important to combat this problem. We do need government, stepping in to hold social media sites accountable. We need good funded journalism that's going to call out and illuminate when these things happen and continue to publish high quality research. We need tech companies to step in and on their own do some of this work, so it doesn't necessarily need to be government mandated. And then I think we hold the front line, if you will. Like let's be aware of our own behaviors. There's an interesting feature that Twitter is piloting right now. Some people have maybe been involved in it, where if you share a link on Twitter, or you go to retweet something on Twitter, but you haven't clicked on the link first, you're sharing something without having read it. We all do it. Some people will get a pop-up that says, wait a minute, you haven't clicked on this yet. Are you sure you want to share it? And you can, it's not saying you have to click on it in order to share it. It's just asking you to stop for a second, think, slow down. Like, do you want to click on this first to make sure it's like a real website and it's a story that's not just.
But this guy's like, he's alive on Twitter. He likes the retweets, and this is joy. That I'm going to take time out of my day to say some horrible things on a medium under a false identity, just to mess with people on social. Just, you know what I mean? Don't let that exist. Don't let that exist. Let's start with that. Let's start with getting the eggs off, or the the bot accounts, or the, what do you call them? The bots, I think it's bots.
Yeah,
the
bots.
fake accounts, bot accounts that just retweet and get rid of that. I'm pretty
sure
you can.
Sure. You want Twitter to do that. But in the meantime, I think it's on us also to be a little bit more cognizant of when we encounter a bot.
Yeah, but what I want to get to is, if this guy who's like and is loving it is coming at you and he's super, hyper clicking on the comment section below, you know what I mean? You can smell that guy coming from a mile away. Like, just don't engage.
Yeah.
Don't engage. And but sometimes when I get bored, I'll just scroll down the comment sections and read conversations. They have nothing to do with the video.
Yeah.
Nothing. And that's what I mean. Are we not ready for this as human beings? I don't think the world is. Because I think we need to learn how to talk to each other first. And, you know what I mean? I don't think we got that one down yet, although it's been 10 million years or whatever.
I mean, there's a famous quote, I don't remember who said it, sorry, that said technology is neither inherently good nor bad nor neutral.
I think we can end on that.
Well, it was a great conversation.
There you go. Drop the mic.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you make it this way, this side of the world, to the GCC, to Qatar, and if that ever happens, it'd be lovely to meet you and continue this conversation. I wish you the best of luck. Give my love to the Shah, baby, and I will be there soon. All right. As soon as we can, travel easily. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everyone watching us on Facebook. This episode will be on YouTube soon. I almost made it through the whole episode without coughing. But yeah, cheers, everyone. Good night. See you on the next episode of Swalif. Bye-bye.